Well, leaders around the world watched in disbelief as the chaos unfolded in Washington. Many have condemned the violence and called for democracy to be respected. German Chancellor Angela Merkel gave her reaction a little while ago. Let's listen in.
We all saw the unsettling pictures of the US Congress being stormed yesterday evening, and these images made me angry and also sad. I'm sure those feelings are shared by the vast majority of the United States' friends and the millions of people who admire America's democratic traditions. A basic rule of democracy is, after elections, there are winners and losers. Both have to play their roles with decency and responsibility, so that democracy itself remains the winner. And I very much regret that since November, President Trump has not acknowledged his defeat and failed again to do so yesterday. Doubts about the outcome of the election were stoked, and that set the stage for what made Wednesday's events possible in the first place. But the words of President-elect Joe Biden and reactions from both US parties make me quite certain that democracy will prove to be much stronger than the attackers and rioters.
Our chief political editor, Mishaela Kufna, was there covering the Chancellor's statement for us. Hi, Mishaela. What did you make of what we heard from Chancellor Merkel?
Well, clearly Angela Merkel has come full circle with US President Donald Trump. It was her who made her cooperation conditional on him adhering to those Western values of democracy when she congratulated him to his election victory 4 years ago. Now we see a German Chancellor who's giving him at least part of the blame for the scenes that we saw on Capitol Hill over the past 24 hours. And I asked her directly what damage she felt had been done to the very concept of Western democracy. And she responded saying that, yes, of course, this didn't really paint a very positive picture, particularly to those watching all over the world who don't wish democracy well, who want to see a more totalitarian rule. This is something she's referred to many times, actually, particularly throughout this pandemic, that democracies need to show that they can deliver. But she did also stress, as she would do, that democratic institutions are prevailing in the United States, and that was the important message that was also being sent by those scenes.
Well, many Germans have also been echoing Chancellor Merkel's concerns about what happened in Washington. We talked to some people on the streets of Berlin. Let's listen to what they said.
I was very, very shocked. These pictures reminded me of the situation at the German parliament, when conspiracy theorists stormed the Bundestag. What was really bad was that in the USA, of all places, people managed to get through. There was no police. No one could stop them. Terrible. I didn't expect something like this, but I guess you can't expect anything else from Trump.
I do think that it's not a bad idea to show that a state should wield power to ensure security in a country.
Eine Staatsgewalt geben muss, damit auch die Sicherheit in einem Land, wenn wir schon so zusammenleben wollen, gewahrt bleibt.
But it is also important to show that the power still comes from the people.
Okay, Mishaela, hearing some voices there from Germans. What about other lawmakers here in Berlin? How worried are they by what unfolded in Washington?
Well, they are certainly disconcerted, but even within the governing coalition, you see differences in how this is being received and interpreted. The chief whip of the Social Democrats, who also have the foreign ministry here in Germany, he said that it was now time for Europe to depart from standing so close at America's side, whereas Angela Merkel's conservative camp sees this as reaffirmation that now was the time to stand together with the United States and defend that very value of democracy. I also would like to add that the German president, who largely holds a ceremonial role here in Germany, accused Donald Trump of having disregarded the cornerstone of democracy, that peaceful transfer of of power. He also appealed to Germans, that, particularly to politicians quite clearly, that in this election year in Germany, it was time to show that democracy would prevail and that the democracy would be stronger than all the differences that people may have. So this is yet again sparking debate over the relationship with the United States, at the same time sending the signal that it's time to decide how united the West, and particularly with the US at the helm, really is.
Our chief political editor, Mishaela Kufna, thank you very much. Well, earlier we spoke to James D. Bindenagel from the University of Bonn. He served as an American diplomat in Germany over the course of 3 decades. We asked him what he made of the chaotic scenes from Washington.
I have had much experience with the two countries for almost 47 years. Let me just say that I am appalled, shamed, and I find it pitiful the way that the president has incited this insurrection, this sedition that has stormed the American Capitol the first time since the War of 1812 in 1814. It is an awful, appalling effort to undermine our democracy.
How worried are you about the state of the U.S. democracy right now?
I am very concerned. I'm also at the same time reaffirmed that when Congress then decided and came back immediately after the Capitol was cleared to continue the business and to confirm the election of Biden and Harris, that is a really very good sign of the resilience of the members of Congress and the institutions that are our democracy. But they're threatened.
There is some relief here in Germany, at least, that Joe Biden was elected. But, I mean, from your sense here, being in Germany, how much trust is there still in the U.S. as a partner?
You know, that's a very important question. I've seen the relationship under Mr. Trump erode in dramatic ways. On the other hand, the point that the Chancellor just made and the point that she made at the very beginning of his term, that we are connected by the values of democracy, rule of law, and the respect for human dignity that have held us together. And it is at this time that the democracies need to come together, because this threat is not just in America. It's also, we see it in Europe all over. We see the populist movements, we see the difficulty of democracies, and we see the strength of democracies is in being together. And I applaud the Chancellor's comment that we need to stick together in this effort. And it's not a time to abandon your friends when they're in trouble.
What does the president-elect Joe Biden now have to do to restore some of that trust?
The Democrats, and certainly the president and the vice president-elect, will need to reach out to those 74 million people who Mr. Trump has misled through his conspiracy theories and lies, so that they can understand that the democratic process is one that they should join in and remain. The Democrats need to respond to the concerns that they have, that many people have been left out, have been left behind by globalization and trade agreements. And the financial crisis, many people lost their homes and they've lost their identity. Those are issues that are really core that Mr. Trump had been used to change. And what we need to do in America is address those concerns and win them back for democracy and get them out of the fantasy world of Mr. Trump.
James D. Bindenagel, director of the Center for Advanced Strategic and Integration Studies, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, across Europe, other leaders have echoed Chancellor Merkel's condemnation of the attack on the U.S. Capitol. This is what French President Emmanuel Macron had to say.
I just wanted to express our friendship and our faith in the United States. What happened today in Washington, D.C. is not America, definitely. We believe in the strength of our democracies. We believe in the strength of American democracy.
Let's get some more European perspective now. We can speak to Radik Shikorsky. He's the chair of the Delegation for Relations with the U.S., a member of the European Parliament. And he's joining us on the line from Naklo, Poland. Mr. Shikorsky, I want to ask you first of all about a tweet that you sent out saying that the U.S. cabinet should immediately, under the 25th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, declare Donald Trump insane and terminate his presidency. So you really think that President Trump is not fit to serve out his final days in office?
No, he isn't, and he never was. And the College of Electors, which was specifically created by the founders of the American Republic to prevent demagogues from gaining office, should have fulfilled that role. And let me remind you that his own Secretary of State called him a moron. And it was he who called for these demonstrators to march on the Capitol. And the question is what else he can do in the remaining 2 weeks in office. And from what I hear, members of his cabinet are considering whether or not to invoke the 25th Amendment.
What message do you think this sends? Because the German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said democracy's enemies would rejoice to see images like this. Do you agree?
Well, of course. And you only need to look at Chinese, Russian or Belarusian media to know that that's true. I think it would be useful to remove him from office because that would be done by the people that he himself appointed. And that, in the long run, would hopefully stem some of the conspiracy theories that he will no doubt continue to peddle after he leaves office.
OK, and we've heard that this is not just a threat in the U.S. We know that Europe has seen populist surges as well. So do you think that something like this could actually happen in Europe as well?
Well, Trump and others like him have discovered that about a third of the population of most countries doesn't care about democracy and, in fact, has an authoritarian viewpoint and is susceptible to atavistic emotions and to a kind of populist rebellion. And what matters is the proportions and whether the pro-democratic majority defends the institution.
We'll leave it there then. Radik Shikorsky, chair of the Delegation for Relations with the U.S., member of the European Parliament. Thank you so much for joining us here on DW.
Thank you.
Well, around the world, there was disbelief at the scenes that unfolded in the U.S. Capitol. We can take a look at some of the front pages from around the world. You see Germany's Bild newspaper here calling it an attempted coup and a moment of great shame. Well, in Britain, the Daily Telegraph did not mince any words here, saying democracy itself was under siege. The pictures, those striking images of Trump supporters storming the Capitol, they dominated the United Arab Emirates Gulf news here. You see that image there. And we also have the Nigerian Tribune issuing this blistering verdict saying Trump supporters defile U.S. democracy. So very clear that the front pages have been dominated by this. Let's get some more international perspective now, going to China. Correspondent Matthias Büllinger is standing by for us there. Hi, Matthias. Good to see you. So we know that China compared the storming of the Capitol with the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. Tell us more about this comparison.
Yes, more specifically, the spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry was referring to the storming of the Legislative Council in July last year in Hong Kong and highlighted that that day in Hong Kong and that night nobody had died. Unlike in the US, there is a lot of glee in nationalist circles in China. The Chinese propaganda and the nationalists have been portraying democracy as a chaotic and uncontrollable system for many times, and this, of course, provided an occasion for them to continue to do so. The nationalist tabloid Global Times posted photos of the events in Washington using the words, "What a beautiful sight to behold,"